Good afternoon, Franklin County. I'm here for another episode of Talk of the County. I'm here today with the CEO of the YWCA and the CEO for the Community Shelter Board. Elizabeth Brown serves as the president and CEO of the YWCA, and Shannon Isom serves as the CEO, president of the Community Shelter Board.
Yes.
Two very important organizations in our community that service our residents each and every day who have fell into a position of either being unhoused, in the need of emergency shelter, or in the need of permanent supportive housing. So I would like to lead off by asking, how did you both get involved in this field, especially considering the challenges of being a nonprofit leader post-COVID-19?
Well, I'll jump in. I jumped into the field after COVID. So I started at YWCA Columbus in January of 2023. And at that time, we provide housing. And so the period of COVID lockdowns and then the uncertainty that created for budgets of social services agencies were still kind of underpinning a lot of the work that we did. We were also a childcare provider. And so under the YWCA umbrella, there were a lot of different business lines that we had to continue to get innovative and creative about addressing the challenges of the day. So in January 2023, we were still facing a lot of dangers of COVID, or really anxieties about COVID in our group housing settings, and at the same time facing some deficits in our childcare work because it was such an uncertain time, particularly for the childcare workforce. And so I dove in at that time, and it's really been amazing to see what the last 18 months have been like in our community and in the work that we do. So that's my story.
I have been involved with nonprofits for some time, and certainly pre-COVID. So I don't view it as really choosing something post-COVID, but more or less maybe choosing the change of my focus, which is homelessness. Pre or post-COVID, I feel the exact same way about the need for really rigor, intentional discipline around people that are really smart, solving very difficult challenges. And so I have and will continue to dedicate time and energy to the philanthropic space, mostly because there's a lot of philanthropists in the philanthropic space, but we also need a lot of other talent, including strategy and intellectual acumen and rigor. And so for me, it called me in for some of those challenges that need to be solved. And so whether pre or post, I'm here. I'm dedicated to anything that shows up with the stridency of the human condition.
Do you think the role of a nonprofit leader has been modified at all, being that you was a nonprofit executive, as you stated, before COVID-19 and now afterwards?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. I do view that as being a change. I've always felt, and it's probably many of you already do, boards call you in and people ask for your assistance, both formally and informally. So in a lot of ways, nonprofits and nonprofit leadership, let's say pre-COVID, were always challenged on how to navigate a world where resources were very dynamic. What I think is a little bit different with your question now than maybe was before pre-COVID, which was pre-COVID, is that there is now an expectation that business strategy, maybe even some ways of a skill set around research, certainly political acumen, relationship acumen, are all now expected. And maybe that's a little different than 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay.
I don't have the experience that Shannon does in being a nonprofit leader before COVID, but one thing I observed coming into my role in that period of a COVID hangover, for lack of a better description, is that I think there are new and greater expectations on nonprofit leaders when it comes to our workforce, right? When it comes to our role as employers. Workforce challenges were really put into high relief throughout COVID and immediately following after. And so, of course, the most obvious example is in the healthcare field, but also so many nonprofits were really frontline workers during that time. And there's a real reckoning in what it takes to retain and recruit a workforce in today's economy. And so because of the unique nature of especially social services work, I do think that there is a different role that nonprofit leaders have to sort of tack on to all their other roles, which is higher expectations around sort of running a business with your role as an employer in charge of a workforce.
Yes, excellent point. I vividly remember a short time after you assumed this role at the YWCA, you approached leadership and stated, I want to bring my workers up to a living wage as measured by the wage it takes to be able to actually afford and be stable in housing the people that are serving our residents that are in shelter.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Administrator Wilson. Great memory. One of the things I observed when I started, we do listening circles where our social justice department will go in and really offer staff a safe place to talk about what they're experiencing, because the work, particularly of providing services in a homeless shelter, can be not just it's a traumatic time for residents, but also can feel traumatic for staff. So we've always wanted to do that safe space. And one thing that I heard, anonymously in downloading those listening circles is how many of our employees were themselves in a position of housing insecurity while they served individuals who had the housing rug pulled out from underneath them. So that felt wrong. It also felt untenable as an employer.
Right. Even, nonprofit and public sector workers, there's an expectation that you bring a servant attitude, to have a certain level of empathy, but you have to also remember that our frontline workers face life as well.
That's right.
And even with the purest heart, stress is stress. If you're under stress to make ends meet, if you have a family and you just on that edge of being housing insecure, or even food insecure, because we've had some periods of time where just going to the grocery store for the average family has been tough with some of the inflationary pressures that individuals have felt. And Ms. Brown, you also have the benefit of serving at the other side of the desk, as you honorably served on Columbus City Council, and the nonprofit leaders came to you and asked you could help. So talk about how that dynamic and how you still remember that side of the table, and now that you are a nonprofit executive.
Well, how long do we have? I have so many observations in such a short time. So I do think the job of an elected official, especially in any kind of legislative or executive position, is to be a generalist, is to really be able to understand any issue that's brought before you, because you don't know what will be most urgent at any given time. And because of that, you have to rely on excellent guidance from staff, but also on excellent and honest folks who can translate the information about what's going on. So I do know that in my role as a city council member, I really relied on what I heard from the community of nonprofit leaders to help inform the decisions that we had in front of us. There are always too many organizations in need of funding, and we have to rely on the expertise of those in the field so that we can get the information straight and we can understand what to do with the public dollars that have been entrusted to those elected officials. I think about that a lot in this role. I hope that it does give me that it does prepare me even better to be a translator of what I see, right? Because I know that the decisions can come fast and furious, and the problems can seem really steep to solve.
This community has a legacy of supporting health and human services from both the private sector, philanthropic community, government, local government, both city government at the municipal level and county government, but it just never seems enough. And with that optic in mind, how can you candidly share to both of you, how do you see the status of homelessness and housing insecurity in Franklin County today, as we're saying?
Yeah, I'll answer that first. The homelessness and the housing insecurity is certainly both from a health and human services, but I believe in if not the nonprofits that are directly responsible. I think many of the nonprofits, because of the connectivity, the periphery need is consistently thinking about this. You both mentioned, and Administrator Wilson, you mentioned also that now, which I think is a little different than pre-COVID, we now have to think about not only our staff making a wage, but the staff stress of just even if they're making an Ohio wage, that we understand how close people are to destabilization of not just housing, but innumerable parts of their safety net. I think that that's part of also a nonprofit leader to think about those things and think about those things too consistently of a viable workforce. I think also, secondarily, with the increase of the stress and the strain around housing, is in how do other nonprofits collaborate and partner along with you, which maybe even before COVID, you could stand more singularly in your space and stand more singularly around your mission. Where I don't know if that works so well now because people have multiple dimensions to their destabilization that must be addressed. And if not with some emergent need, with some urgency. I think that's been an added element. And so if you put all those things together and then you start talking about the system of housing and the system of homelessness and the readiness of response, it is very much a reflection of all the wonderful elements we love to think about in this economy. That there has been such a boom, such a great, robust growth on our economy, and so for the degradation and of some of those systems around homelessness. There's been such a wonderful tapestry of not only additions of businesses, but people running to this community and picking it. And so does, right, the opposite of that, people being pushed out onto out and out of housing because of vacancy rates and being just outpriced. For those young people who we know the health of our community depends on, and certainly what business and entrepreneurship is hanging its hat on, so does, right, we see on the opposite end where we have an explosion of elderly being destabilized in housing. And so, both through the good and maybe then some of the really hard issues that we have to look at with this economic boom, and is so the housing destabilization. I would say that although that it is difficult, what I will note is it is on everyone's mind. I can't move in not one room or a table that's not talking about it, whether I'm there around healthcare, whether we're there around public health and safety, whether we're there around education. And that is something really, I think, is an opportunity for us to be excited about, that this is no longer around a singular siloed or solo nonprofit hanging their hat on trying to figure this out. This is really a system, regional response that we're trying to figure out.
And, I would only add, I'll underscore what Shannon said about, prosperity. The prosperity we're increasing, there's really a parallel, if not causal track between prosperity and poverty, right? And that you look around the nation and that happens everywhere, particularly poverty when it comes to housing, right? Insecurity of housing really runs parallel to prosperity and is probably caused by prosperity because communities have to build so rapidly. They have to predict and bank on this prosperous track is going to keep coming for us. So we're going to be able to overbuild to catch the growth that's coming, which is far more complex, I think, than people realize to do. And our community has so much more to do there to be able to account for what we're losing in essentially housing affordability right now. And another thing, though, that I will add, Administrator Wilson, you talked about how it does feel like there is such a need at all times in the human services sector. And, from your position in the county, I think that one of the reasons it feels that way, and forgive me expressing my candid opinion here, but I think the state legislature has not taken on their share of the responsibility. So if you have a state legislature that is more interested in passing bills on who can use what bathrooms, and what children are allowed to play what sports, and how they can unfairly draw district lines and whether they want to keep President Biden off the ballot, if these are the issues that motivate them to come and convene session, they are not focused on the human condition and the work that I think, frankly, is left to our local governments to really sit down, dig in, and try to solve alongside nonprofit leaders.
Yes. The state's role in health and human services is as an overseer and a rule maker.
Yes.
And they're delivered by design at the county level to be administered and funded, which requires county governments, municipalities to look for funding from other places, be it property tax levies, be it general fund dollars. It's just constantly trying to find ways to fund the growing health and human services needs. And Lord be with us when the American Rescue Plan dollars begin to be dwindle away, because the demand has been there, and it has allowed local governments to do things to mitigate some of the pain in communities that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So that is one of the things that really is concerning to me. As the administrator of the largest and still growing and won't stop growing county in the state, and one of the fastest growing in the country, is how do we deal with this demand? You talk about youth. We have a lot of youth. We have a lot of college students. We have a lot of new Americans, people coming to Franklin County seeking opportunity. And we can't seem to build enough workforce development infrastructure to make sure that we create an opportunity for every resident that moves here and want to have a family and want to do well. But when you measure us in the aggregate, Ms. Brown, you kind of followed into my next question. When you measure Franklin County in the aggregate, we are, by all measures, a double AAA rated county. We have surpluses. We are able to manage things fairly well compared to some other communities. We are, when you look at per capita incomes, you look at the number of college educated individuals, by all of those measures, we are a healthy community with vast resources. But you can look at data that shows that poverty and homelessness and health disparities, such as an infant mortality rate that none of us has been happy about, and we've been trying to tackled infant mortality for at least 20 years, it seems, and we still are not where we need to be. And we look at the issues around affordability of childcare. Is a major issue. And we talk about being innovative. We talk about things such as guaranteed income and looking at those kind of things. Those kind of things are good, but there are some fundamental things that could be done, like simply bringing back a ongoing child tax credit from the federal level.
That's right.
Would make all the difference in the world in reducing child poverty.
And we saw it happen.
We saw it happen. And then it went away. And because of the numbers in Congress.
In real time and in measures afterwards, it was deemed, shown, proven to be successful. Successful.
The politics of it, Social Security, Medicare really changed the face of what poverty in this country looked like. Huge initiatives that covered, a vast swath of the American people and frankly made government look good. And people rely on these programs, and the politics of another common sense program that would have stabilized families, just couldn't happen because of, okay, if it's a feather in one side's cap, then it's a problem for the other side.
We saw it work. And it wasn't a disincentive to working. Those that were getting it were people that work.
That's right. That's right. It is becoming more and more of what we know is the centering of the human condition, especially when the government can scale, when it can create redundancy, when it has partnerships with the state. I think that cannot be missed, especially in a state like Ohio, where this particular county is growing leaps and bounds, not to compare with other counties, but in a pretty significant way. When you see those things lined up, if you have all of that in alignment and not commodify housing, not commodify children, not commodify those services and resources that are needed for not only a healthy workforce, but for a healthy community, when we can make common sense, I hate to use that, but really some common sense choices. What we know is that some of the other things that are really more strident within our community, Administrator Wilson, which is how do I keep those that are really with exacerbated mental health needs, maybe healthcare needs that are on the street, how do I then get to be focused on them? We can't, because we have just what you said, a constant amount of people that are moving into homelessness because of issues like this. They don't have enough dollars for healthcare. They don't have enough dollars for childcare. They don't have enough dollars for housing. So it does feel constant. And I think it is because of some of these really important elements that we know make sense. And the relationship with the state, with the county that is just exceedingly beyond growing beyond its measure, which needs also in its own way an alignment of resources and scaling and parity. It makes for your job and ours, but your job really very difficult.
What do you all see as the main challenges and barriers in the current homeless response system that exacerbates racial disparities?
Oh gosh. I'm going to take a line from Elizabeth. How long do I have? I can talk about this for.
Oh, we talk an hour. We cut it down to 30 minutes, or it becomes a 2-part series.
Okay. I think both Liz and I can talk about this for a long time. When we get down to any parts of resource alignment, and especially what nonprofits are doing. Obviously, with Health and Human Services are constantly thinking about, we are always talking about intersectionality. And I would say not only around race, class, and with gender, but if we're really talking about racial aspects, we know that there are many and multiple systems working at the exact same time that once deployed and then stressed can truly have parts of our community struggling, and even in the struggle, having disparities within that, even in the struggle. And so we know that no matter how we slice it, whether we're looking at housing, in thinking about our historical regulations that we had to keep certain communities more monochromatic or maybe even more pure. We know that whether we're looking at some covenant laws around housing, we also know that multiple disparities, including in recent times, at least in my lifetime, around the 80s and 90s, that started criminalizing specific parts of our population, started archetyping for the welfare mom. We know that there are multiple ways that worked together to ensure that the systemic disparity around race is seen. And I will tell you that when I disaggregate the data within our shelter system, whether we see it within youth, whether we see it within our family centers and emergency shelters, whether we see it within our domestic violence centers, whether regardless of how I cut it across my shelters, including across those that need heavy support called permanent supportive housing, the housing that has heavy support and subsidy, regardless of how I slice it, you will see more poverty, more Black people, and more moms.
Ms. Isom, you lead me to the next place I want to go is trauma. Trauma on individuals. That term childhood adverse experiences is real. It has a lingering effect. It leads to individuals developing a sense of hopelessness at an early age, which I would argue is probably one of the factors in a certain extent in community violence and in youth getting in contact with the criminal justice system much too early in life and becoming systematized, I would use the word. But we can do something about that by improving one's experiences regardless of a zip code through specific programming, by exposing our youth and giving our families opportunities. And one of the things that you have began to promote that I believe is one of the things that reduces trauma in families when they become unhoused is a move away from a congregate warehouse type setting for individuals when they're trying to transition back. Talk about that model as well as talk about some other innovative approaches and best practices your organization has implemented to address the realities that this community faces.
The first that I'm very proud of as I've walked into the community shelter board and in this community and have been challenged with some gaps, not only within our homeless system, but some gaps within the way that we move through policies and relationships around how to operationalize those systems. One of the many things that I'm really proud of is the first, which is that we get to define, this community, Franklin County gets to define what families are. So we don't have to think about the traditional HUD definition of families. We get to see that definition, understanding that we must comply because the dollars matter, but also understanding that we can do one step further. So whether that is two sisters that are in homelessness, or if there's same-sex couples that are in homelessness, whether that includes a pet that's part of that family, we have moved to ensure that if you are homeless and you define your family as this, and so be it. And so we now have resources that are aligned to that through a non-congregate model. We also, which I'm really, really proud about, have also just put in our own ethos of how do we divert as a natural way in which we are thinking about homelessness. And diversion doesn't mean just can you identify a person or two in which you can go to ensure that you can't go into the shelter, but giving people cash assistance, without all the ties, and saying, we understand that as something as low as $1,000 or $1,500 will not only keep you out of the shelter, but will keep you out of the shelter, and we're still looking at a year and a half, almost 2 years. Mm-hmm. We know that has become no longer about a pilot, but how do we do our work? And then thirdly I think it's imperative that we challenge ourselves to end something around homelessness. I think not only can we do it, but I think it'll start making the community believe that we can do something big. Yeah. We got to start biting off this a little at a time. Non-congregate model will allow us to take families, administrator, put them in spaces where they get to concentrate on the work that they need to do with their kids, with their significant other, in a lot of ways what you and I take for granted and do every day. This allows a couple of things: that the energy isn't spent in trying to organize the noise that is in a congregate shelter model. Mm-hmm. It'll also allow that energy not to be expended on where are my children if they are out of sight. When you're in a congregate model, you're constantly organizing where your children are. Thirdly, it allows you to have some quiet space, your mind to have some quiet time to concentrate on the things that need to be done. And fourth, it allows you to plan, which all of us need time to do. I believe that although that this is a model that we are just starting, Colonial Village, Latitude 525, and some of the ways in which we work with the emergency shelters around families of overflow, we have seen gleaned some excellent results from it. And I know for certain that those families come back less, which means it saves our system. More than anything, administrator, what we hope it does is break the generational violence, the generational subsidy, and the generational hopelessness that you were speaking about. We want to make sure that children don't come back. And then I'm going to answer this with this final. Why do I know it's imperative to do it? We are dealing with a family today, a mother who has 2 children. She was pregnant and found out yesterday that she lost her pregnancy. We believe a lot of that can happen, but we also believe a lot of that has to do with the stress and the strain of being in that situation. Being trauma and stress of being in homelessness. So we know that that's the truth. But here's the kicker. She was in the family shelter as a child. Right? So we have that generational vicarious trauma that is consistently being passed on. And we know healthcare and in education that those have deleterious effects. We have to, and we're compelled to change that. I believe we can do that in the non-congregate model by buying and organizing what I call underutilized resources, hotels, motels, those structures that are readied, that can be rehabbed, and then working with our partners to be quite frank, and then working with our partners of the best way to organize families and those that would be next in line to go into those spaces.
That removing stigmas around behavioral health is a big issue here in Franklin County, regardless of where you're at on the economic spectrum, I believe. Yeah. Because we all have different type of problems. Yep. From the bottom of the income spectrum to the top and everything in between. And we need more employers to think about the complete person. Yep. And we think about it more at the social service level because we know people are feeling like they're at their all-time low. And they need, that help and that hand up. But sometimes even there, do you feel like the homelessness system has enough resources to have a door for folks that can understand that it's okay not to be okay as they're trying to get their housing stabilized so that they can get behavioral health and mental health services. A lot of times it's counseling, just talking to somebody, just working through situations and say, today might not be good, but if we plan for tomorrow, we can get it out of this.
We have a lot of great partners that come into the Family Center to help on behavioral health issues, to provide counseling. We also run a 5-star quality rated childcare center, early childhood education center at the Family Center.
Repeat that again. How many stars?
5.
5 stars.
You know what that takes.
I know what that takes.
5 stars. 5 stars in a center that serves families during what is probably one of the most traumatic periods of their life, when they're completely housing insecure, right? They're in our center, and we have worked very hard to ensure that when a family walks in the door, there is a place for them in that center. So I'm going to brag on our team for a minute because you gave me the opening to, and 5-star rated, and also to be able to be that nimble with staffing to ensure that no child is turned away when they come, no parent is turned away when they come and they want their child to be safe and sound in our facility. So we're really, really proud of that. And because of the training of our teachers too, we actually find that we end up doing, this is not so much behavioral health, but there are components of, early signs for needing occupational therapy or any other kind of developmental delays that a child who may be coming to center-based care or maybe in the care of a really high quality trained teacher for the first time has that access right away. And we believe that's part of the continuum. And I do feel quite certain that the difference between some of us having a mental health issue, the difference between me having a debilitating mental health condition and someone who's in our shelter is that for me, I can go get treatment. And often for someone who ends up in our shelter, that condition brought them there, right? That is the difference, that frankly, the income you earn is the difference between whether you can get treatment or whether it spells crisis in your life. So it's very important for us to recognize that, I think, in our approach then, our non-stigmatizing approach, as you said, to ensuring that we provide care for people.
It's very important what treatment looks like. That will determine whether someone accepts it or walks away from it.
Yeah. Well, and treatment is also a stable place to live, right? Like
treatment is housing.
Yes, treatment is housing.
Treatment is housing.
That has been proven out. That it doesn't mean that you then ignore any of the behavioral health issues, but treatment is housing, and it starts with housing, and we don't want to do either in a vacuum, and that's why the housing first approach has proven so important.
Yeah, I would say the difference between, and I love that you put it to I would say the difference, administrator, of me having mental health that you can see and someone in a shelter, even in a domestic violence shelter, is as I have a readied house and a readied safety net within that home. And so the effect of me potentially being ill is less evident than when I have scarcity around me. I would caution us, and I do this, I try to make sure I follow my own advice. I would caution us to not be so disturbed by those that have mental health, because most of us do. Most of us do. The difference is that because all things else are well, it allows us to mitigate the symptoms of it. So my charge with a system perspective is that I must, and we've talked about this, I must have, when I'm talking about shelter, I must always have housing first in my mouth, because that is one of the best elixirs for mental health crisis, not taking away that there are additional modalities that many of us need.
You hear it all the time. Housing is health.
Yes.
I mean, most
Physical and mental.
people
Yeah.
get that. It's the key to physical and mental health.
Yes.
It's different
Yes.
to go focus on anybody's job or anybody's lesson plan if you're going to sleep in a car or worse that night.
Yep.
That's right.
You just can't. It's difficult to turn that off.
Yep.
It's extreme. It's just like that's just.
Or if your house is unsafe, or if there's violence, or if there's no food, or if you're not being cared for, even within that home, or it's been shown with research, or if your brain is consumed by having a lack of money or a lack of resources, the scarcity brain, right?
Well, yeah. So, or if you're in shelter, shelter is not housing.
Yes,
I'm
that's right.
very proud of the work we do at the Family Center, but I am very clear: it is not housing. Our families are going through an episode of being unhoused.
Doesn't have all the elements of a home.
They are
That's
in
right.
shelter, and that's different. And again, we are so proud of the services we provide, but we would never say that what it is housing.